Hello and welcome to this Purpose Health Coalition Nurturing Talent Seminar. Now, the Purpose Health Coalition is made up of the UK's most innovative purpose-led leaders and organisations in the health sector. And this seminar is going to focus primarily on supporting and developing your workforce and the importance of providing a range of development opportunities and ensuring fair career progression for all. We're also going to touch on how you provide the correct health and wellbeing support to employees and what the NHS can do to become a better employer. So not much to talk about there. Let me introduce you to our panel. We have Jackie Smith with us, the chair of the Barts Health NHS Trust, Barking, Havering and Redbridge University Hospitals NHS Trust as well. Anne Coyle is Managing Director of South Warwickshire University NHS Foundation Trust. Sarah Thomas is Associate Director of Learning and OD at the Sussex Community NHS Foundation Trust. And Victoria Whitaker is Associate Director of Organisational Development at the Barking, Havering and Redbridge University Hospitals NHS Trust. Now, nurturing talent, I think, is something that we would all agree every employer should do. But I just wonder if the bigger the employer, the more difficult it is to do. And obviously, the NHS has a huge range of staff, from frontline medical care to admin staff to management. And I guess all of those different groups require a rather different approach to nurturing talent. Jackie, I wonder if you'd like to lead us off on this and maybe talk a little bit about the challenges of nurturing talent in the different areas of the organisations that you're responsible for.
Thank you, Ian. And I'm very glad that we're talking about this issue this morning because, as you say, the NHS is the largest employer in England. It's the fifth largest employer in the world, with over 1.2 million full-time equivalent staff. And just in my organisation, we have organisations, we have over 25,000 staff. So it's an enormous responsibility. Also, of course, because people are fundamental to the care that we're trying to provide to our patients. And I was glad that you didn't fall into the trap in asking this question that people often do when talking about the NHS, which is to say it's about nurses and doctors. Of course it is, but it's also about porters, scientists, therapists, clerks, the admin, the managers who are fundamental to ensuring that the system is working properly. And we saw during the COVID pandemic that our staff can be enormously resilient. That's the positive side. The difficulty for us at the moment is that we are facing a real challenge in terms of our workforce. There are about 130,000 vacancies across NHS trusts in England alone, shortages across all of those staffing groups.
What would there be normally?
What would there be?
Every organisation has a normal vacancy level. It's now 130,000. Say in 2019, 2018, what would that figure have been roughly?
It was 100,000 before we went into the pandemic.
Right.
So there has been a difficulty in recruiting sufficient staff into the NHS. There are some areas that are more difficult than others. So, for example, the challenges that we're facing in maternity services, midwives, there's a real shortage of midwives at the moment, which obviously adds to that problem. We've heard recently nationally the difficulty of recruiting nurses, which is one of the reasons why people are looking to recruit from overseas, which, whilst a big solution for lots of NHS trusts, has a whole range of issues associated with it. And of course, one of the things that I suspect we might talk about a little bit more as well is that during the course of there is a potential vicious circle here, which is that if you have a shortage of staff, you then, of course, put more pressure on those staff who you have working with you, who then may make decisions to move away from working within the NHS. What we learned during the course of the pandemic as well is that, as well as imaginative ways of reaching out and attracting people into the NHS, we need to care for them when they are working with us. And, hopefully we'll be able to talk about some of the imaginative ways that I suspect all of us have been focusing on staff wellbeing, as well as what we're doing to recruit and what we're doing to provide career progression, because that's something that people in the NHS, whichever area they're in, quite often say is one of the most important things that is available for them.
Let's go around to everybody else and get your views on what nurturing talent actually means. Because I suppose that in a way it's obvious what it means, but with relation to your particular organisation, Anne, let's go to you.
Thank you, and thank you for arranging this session. I work as managing director in South Warwickshire University Foundation Trust. We became a university trust on the 1st of August. We're an integrated community and acute provider. We cover Warwickshire and into also Solihull and Coventry for children's services. And it is this real broad church of careers that people can have within the NHS. And I don't think that's probably as well understood as it could be. We as an organisation are refreshing our strategy. How do we inspire? How do we develop our people to recover post-COVID and build that resilience for the future? So we're engaging in conversations with our staff as part of that, and really thinking through, how does it feel? How are you as an employee of South Warwickshire Foundation Trust? What's that look like? And would you advocate a career with us? How do we benchmark against other employers in our area? How might we create more diversified roles, flexible working opportunities? One of our values as an organisation is compassion, and it's and inclusive. We've also added. But how are we supporting people to be the best that they can be in their chosen careers? And how are we then, as an employer of choice for colleagues who will do us the honour of having that career with us? And it's really thinking through opportunities and options for the here and now. And really being live to the populations that we serve, the communities that we work with, and how we're representative of those, and really to be that, to really understand the current requirements of colleagues who are entering the job market, and how we understand the next generation of our workforce. So that to me is, how do we nurture? How do we really get beneath this and be attractive to all who wish to have a career in the NHS?
And Sarah Thomas, what are the challenges that are faced by your organisation? Because I suspect there's going to be a common thread here between all the different organisations that we're talking about. But I suppose geography plays a role here. You're in a different part of the country to everybody else. Does that provide challenges?
Yeah, it does, Ian. We're a community trust across the whole of Sussex, so we have a huge range of sites, and career progression is a brilliant way of retaining staff and energising and motivating them, because yes, as Jackie said, we've got all these vacancies, but there's no point in filling the vacancies if we then lose the people that we've got. So we really want to focus on helping people develop their careers. But we also recognise that there may be people who, for whatever personal reasons, are limited geographically in where they can work. So we might have a marvellous opportunity at one end of the county and somebody with great skills and knowledge at the other end of the county, but that's not an option for them. So it's looking at what the pathways are across, upwards, and what's available to people, and really being creative about, actually, we've got this person who's really good. How can we capture and use their skills in a way that, as Anne said, makes them want to stay with the organisation and makes people outside the organisation see us as an employer that people would want to work for.
Victoria Whittaker, you work with Jackie in Barking, Havering and Redbridge. What are the challenges on sort of on multi-site trust? Because you've got different hospitals, and each will have its own unique characteristics and I guess unique staffing requirements. Do you find that you're obviously one organisation, but because there are sort of different sites, what challenges does that give you?
Yeah, absolutely. So for context, BHRUT is made up of 2 acute hospitals. We've got King George Hospital, which is, I would say, a smaller sort of district general hospital, and then Queen's Hospital is much larger. And I think even if you just walk around both sites, you can feel the difference in the culture that exists in both. And certainly the different type of field does lead to the certain different types of people attracted to those environments in particular. So yeah, we are one organisation, but I do think you need to recognise the difference in working in both organisations within one brand, really. So I do think that pulls upon different needs, and there's different cultures that exist. I think Queen's is much more fast paced and rapid throughput, even by the way it's organised structurally in terms of the building. It feels very different. It creates a different culture, possibly more siloed culture, I'd say. And King George is more of a family feel, I'd say, when you're walking around it, which then attracts a different type of working environment. So for individuals looking to grow their careers, they might be more attracted to different types of environment. And I think when we're looking at talent, it's not just the roles, it's the environment to nurture that talent. So your actual connection might be greater to that way of working, the fast-paced, throughput, firefighting type methodology. Whereas like King George, for instance, would be much more, not slower necessarily, but a different feel to it. So certainly I think when we're nurturing talent, it's not just about the skills or the roles, it's about the type of person and what they enjoy doing, and the environment which will nurture what they want to do, not just in skill set, but how they want to do it as well. So certainly we do look at it as one, and I think there is careers that stretch across both, which are very similar, but I think how they play out day to day are very different, the types of roles that exist, which is also good because then we can offer different opportunities, and particularly with our collaboration with Barts, there's an array of different hospitals that offer different cultures as well. So I think there are things that join us together, but certainly we cannot underestimate, I suppose, the impact of the cultures and what attracts people to work there.
This phrase, nurturing talent, I mean, it's a sort of feel-good phrase. It's a sort of group hug type of phrase, isn't it? Because I think, as I said at the beginning, every employer would want to think that they not only nurture talent, but they try to make sure that each individual can be the best that they can be. And there are all sorts of different ways of doing that, but it depends on the individual. There will be some individuals that feel that they're, I don't know, just so busy with their own day-to-day activities in their day job that they can't really afford the time out to go on a training course that their boss thinks that maybe they ought to go on if their talent is to be brought to the fore. And given that there are so many vacancies, given the pressures on various bits of the NHS, I mean, you know better than I do which bits we're talking about, but is there sometimes resistance to career development? I mean, it sounds all odd that anybody would have any resistance, but if you're busy sort of 12 hours a day with not a minute to spare, I guess it's sometimes difficult to fit things in. Victoria, I guess that might be a challenge for you.
It's an absolute challenge, and this is yes, I think when the going gets tough, typically I'd think for most organisations the development side is parked. Which is a shame, really, because it's so important that we do that piece in order for us to grow and change the way we work, for instance. I think it's about how you change your methodology for growing talent. Courses have their place, training has their place, certainly. But I think particularly at BHRUT, we're looking at more experiential methods of development. So actually in situ, in the workplace, how you're learning day to day to grow your skill set, grow your behaviours, whatever they may be, to your desired goal. So examples are our chief nurse has a brilliant nurse fellowship within our organisation, which then basically gives people an opportunity to get out of their jobs just for a week and get exposed to what goes on at senior roles, for instance. And then we've got other opportunities which are growing, sort of like fellowships, see what you can do within your existing role, stretch opportunities, projects that you can work on, so sort of different methods of developing skill sets that contribute to the challenges of the day-to-day. And also, I suppose, enables people to work across boundaries, which is also a barrier, I suppose, to effective working every day. So, yeah, so absolutely, yes, there is a pressure point. We can't change that. That's our context. I think those are the sorts of things we have to accept as our reality. But I think it's how do you develop the skills that are crucial for their next step in their career development as experientially as possible, coupled then with the I suppose the physical learning environment that we know and love, the teaching environment. So absolutely, it's a struggle, and I think it certainly it sends a message if we drop those things when the going gets tough, because I think it's, if we say culturally that's important, you need to maintain that in one way or another. But we need to meet people where they're at, and they are working very difficult roles, and we need to be offering opportunities to develop within their existing parameters, as it were.
And Sarah, do you meet resistance from people within your organisation sometimes to going on training courses or sort of learning new things because they're so busy with their day jobs?
I think to a certain extent it depends on what the training is, and it also depends on the person themselves and their manager. And we know that people leave or stay ultimately because of the support they get from their immediate manager. So we do a lot of work with our managers to encourage them to have development and wellbeing conversations with their staff. But we know that there's diversity of experience. So you can offer out lots of things to everybody, but not everybody will have that same experience depending where they work. So one of our challenges is how do we make sure that everybody is hearing about and able to access things. I think it's also about making sure that the training or development that we're offering people is what's appropriate for them. So we offer career conversations so that we can tailor development to where people actually are aiming to take their personal career, and also making sure that the training we're asking them to go on is absolutely relevant and appropriate for the role they're doing. So we've done a lot of review of training that's mandatory for role and kind of gone, does this person really need to do this in the role they're in? Yes, in which case we'll prioritize it. No, or maybe no, they don't need it to do it as often. So it's about making sure that the training that they're doing is relevant and appropriate, and using all the learning from the pandemic. We're offering it in different ways because we found we necessarily had to, but actually it's now more accessible, and a lot of people actually will go on more online compressed learning than they might have done if they'd had to travel and then attend a whole day seminar and then travel back again.
You're on mute, Ian, I think.
In the end, leadership has to come from the top, doesn't it? And if the chief executive or the chair of the trust is seen as not being particularly committed to nurturing talent and is more concerned with getting sort of frontline results, then I guess that is a problem. Now, the two of you that are at the top of your organisations, Anne and Jackie, are you conscious of this, that you need to emphasise to your teams that nurturing talent is a real priority of your organisation? And Jackie first.
I partly agree with you, Ian. I mean, the example that is set from the top is absolutely fundamental. So, for example, one of the things that we have done in sort of governance terms is that we've said, if people are really important, why aren't we talking about it in more meetings, and why aren't we putting it higher up our agendas when we have board meetings, for example? We've also seen the new integrated care system, for example, across North East London, make employment and workforce one of its 4 priorities. And that's obviously because it's so fundamental to delivering services in our communities, but also, of course, because good employment means good health as well. So there's a sort of a virtuous circle you can develop there. But what's also important, as others have said, is that approach to good leadership and management goes all throughout the organisation, because it was exactly right what was just said. Somebody described it to me yesterday as people join an organisation but they leave a manager. So unless our managers are engaging properly with their staff, they're doing, we've also introduced at Barts Health, for example, a new career and talent management function for managers, which helps them to talk to their staff about where there might be career opportunities, how they could develop themselves. We've got people being able to have access to a mentor. We've got new opportunities as well that come, just to go back to a previous point that I think Victoria made, the local environment is really important. And sometimes in the NHS, I think we haven't always focused on the talent that we could get from our local community. So at Barts, for example, our Barts Health Futures, in partnership with Newham College, is training people who perhaps wouldn't even have considered a career in the NHS, including refugees and others who really need those opportunities, providing apprenticeships, all sorts of other ways in which we're then encouraging local people into our organisations to help to fill the gaps. And the collaboration that is happening between Barts and BHIUT means some of the other things that people look for, like, you know, perhaps at different stages in my career, I want to work in different sorts of organisations. So, you know, I want to experience what it's like to be in a very big trauma centre, so I could go to the Royal London, or I want to be in a sort of internationally specialised, research-focused organisation, so I might go to St Bart's. When you collaborate across the system and across organisations, you can provide many more of those opportunities for your staff, and that's one of the things that will make them want to stay.
Well, that brings me on to the next point, because I think staff retention in any organisation, whether it's the NHS or anywhere else in our current economy, is an important thing. And of course, pay, I suppose, is part of that. I don't know if any of you have any insight into how things have changed or maybe got more difficult in the area of staff retention, and what measures you can bring in to try and ensure that you do retain as many staff as you really want to. Because I think that this is one of those things that changes over time, isn't it? And in your organisation, how have you seen this area develop?
I think it's building on some of the building blocks we've got. So a really strong appraisal, for example, making sure that, you know, being very alert to people's aspirations, and then connecting, you know, following on from Jackie's point around the collaboration and how if people have aspirations or they want to explore different elements of their career, how we might work with other colleagues to facilitate that. So I think a really strong appraisal. We also have to think, you know, we've got this sort of blended workforce now of hybrid working and home working and working with it, you know, on site, as it were. So providing those different opportunities, our work with universities, for example, you know, how people, you know, may be able to explore their the research element of their role. And finally, with schools, you know, starting to think as early as possible, you know, encouraging that a career within the NHS, thinking about not just the doctors or nurses, but the really broad church and the many, many different careers and apprenticeships. You know, how I started myself as a physiotherapist and explored through different routes and different elements of the career so that I could fulfill my potential within it. And it's just continuously, I suppose, in leadership roles and in managerial roles and as an organisation, supporting those conversations to understand how we can best meet individual aspiration to deliver the collective gain.
Jackie, how much does pay play a role here? Because obviously there are some jobs which are quite vocational, but then I know we're talking about predominantly the NHS, but you look at the social care sector where pay rates for social care workers are basically minimum wage. And not only that, you have to pay for your petrol when you're going from house to house. Now, there's not much of an incentive for someone to remain loyal to an organisation when they're not really being rewarded properly for the work that they do. Now, I do think things are different within the NHS, but these are real challenges in days when every organisation's budgets are necessarily not very flexible. How do you make sure that you are competitive, and particularly with both of the trusts that you chair in London, where pay is generally higher than the rest of the country?
Well, you're right, Ian, that of course one of the problems for us managing trusts is that there are national pay levels. Now, that's not to say that I necessarily would want to pay differential pay rates in the trusts that I'm responsible for, but that is set nationally. And of course, we've seen and will probably experience in the near future some groups of staff who will be striking for more pay because of the situation we find ourselves in at the moment of course, considerable cost of living pressures. Now, you mentioned social care, and I think at the beginning I said, look, if we think that we've got problems in the NHS in terms of our workforce and our vacancies, I suspect that's almost nothing compared to the situation that they're finding in social care, where actually pay rates are considerably lower, and where, because people they have an expertise, but they can quite easily transfer to other workplaces. And when social care has a problem, the NHS has a problem as well. But of course, the other thing that we've been thinking about and working on is somewhere where we can have an impact is overall staff well-being, but also responding to cost of living pressures. So at BHRUT, for example, we've done we've recognised that quite a few of our staff, notwithstanding they're on, reasonable pay rates in the NHS, nevertheless have got cost of living pressures. So some sort of practical things like a marketplace that we set up where staff could swap items rather than buying new ones, whether or not that's, school uniform for their kids or medical books that they might need. We provided vouchers.
You are the Noel Edmonds of the NHS. Going back to the swap shop.
We are indeed. We've extended the hours of our shuttle bus service. We're offering employee discounts in the hospital canteens. We're providing free menstrual products for our staff in staff toilets. More, as others have said, more flexibility to work from home to help to reduce travel costs, increasing the mileage allowances. Now, lots of other things. Well, introducing the ability for staff through a particular app to be able to access a percentage of their pay in advance, to help them to cope in really difficult times, and of course to help them to avoid going to payday loan companies and others that will cause them all sorts of problems. So there are things that we can do as trusts to both provide practical support, but also I think that's about saying, look, you are our most important asset and we do care about you, and this is the way that we're signifying it.
That's really interesting, all those different things that you're doing, some of which will cost money, others won't. But is there some portal within the NHS where you can sort of share good practice, where you've had these ideas in your trusts, but they might not have occurred to somebody, I don't know, in Liverpool or Manchester? Can you share information so people can see what works and what doesn't?
Well, I would say about so one of the reasons why I said I think it's important that within our system in North East London we're focusing on workforces. Even in that system, I'm not sure the good things that are happening in one place are necessarily communicated elsewhere. So we'll be able to do that there. Others might say different, but one of the things about the NHS is it isn't always very good at sharing good practice and practical things from one place to another. So this webinar, for example, will enable other people to learn about it, but it's not something the NHS is always that great at doing.
Sarah and Victoria, Sarah first, in your organisation, have you noticed over time that it has become more difficult to retain staff? And I don't know if any of the ideas that Jackie was talking about there, whether you've deployed those. How do you try to make sure that you don't have an increasing level of staff departures?
So we've done a number of things, and yes, some of the things like the accessing the salary, part of your salary earlier, and the fuel allowance. I would say some and some in terms of whether people are sharing across. So I think there are some ideas that people are doing and are introducing. Other things that we've done, and you're absolutely right. How do we stop people leaving? Encourage people not to leave. So we've done a few things. We've introduced a wellbeing fund that is funded both through our charity and through our own wellbeing fund, which enables teams to say what will make a difference to them. And actually that's been really helpful, because we've done some trust-wide initiatives where we've known about something, but we've said, you're a local team in that place, what would help you? And that's funded things like standing desks. It's funded team building activities that they haven't been able to do for the last couple of years. It's funded sort of tea and coffee top-ups, because one of the things they may get if they go into the private sector is free tea and coffee. We've also introduced we call it a job options line, where we encourage people to talk to us about in advance of handing in their notice, because to a certain extent, once somebody's handed in their notice, it's too late. What you want to know is, I'm thinking about leaving, I'm not quite sure, and then we can get behind the, well, what's that about, and is there anything we can do about it? And
that's quite a difficult one, though, isn't it? Because it will take quite a lot of courage for someone to say, well, I'm thinking about leaving. I don't think in my whole career I've ever had anyone do that.
So it's been a slow start, and actually we need to sort of relaunch it. But do, because they're not talking to their manager. So, and what was interesting was you can then see the themes of what's making people leave. And quite early on, it was around flexible working. And it wasn't, for a lot of people, it wasn't that they had their flexible working requests turned down. They'd kind of decided that they wouldn't get, I want to work, I want to come in late because I need to drop off at school, but in my job, I won't be able to do that. So often it's helping them to have the conversation, or saying, well, you might not be able to do that, but what might work for you? So just for some people, just having that conversation has helped. And it has, in some cases, enabled us to say, well, actually, the fit for where you are working at the moment clearly isn't working. Let's look at what other options might be available. So
when people do that, I mean, what percentage do actually stay after that conversation?
Quite a lot. I mean, I'm not sure of the specific figures, but a lot of people come back and say, actually, it was really helpful because I've now gone to my manager and we've decided that. I think some have gone anyway. If they do go, we at least get the insight so that we can then use that insight when we're thinking about helping others, encouraging others to stay. So that's been quite useful. But yes, you're absolutely right. I would say we just need to focus on how can we support people through wellbeing and development, to see that it's really difficult to say at the moment. There's more to it than pay, but actually it's the NHS as a whole is a really positive employer to be part of. But it's encouraging people to see that there's much more than pay involved in the sort of benefits package.
Victoria, do you want to pick up on any of these things before we move on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a phrase, isn't it? Pay people enough money to get the issue of money off the table. I think, like, the people within the NHS are vocational. Their values are with patients. So I think it's a case of meeting their basic needs with that. But that aside, I think at BHRUT, particularly pre-pandemic, we got a very in-depth culture diagnostic of what was going on. So you could really, really understand what were the themes that were driving people to leave, or even people to stay and be dissatisfied where they were. I think knowledge is power with these sorts of things, and it's not one universal theme. There are themes within teams, there's themes within divisions, there's themes within sites. And I think we all need to appreciate the complexity of why people leave, or why people stay, or why people are unhappy. So I think at BHRUT, we're trying to be more preventative in the sense of getting access to a multitude of data and intelligence to triangulate it and go, basically, what's our heat map of our organisation? Where do we have really high performing teams, really high performing cultures? And those are the people we need to work with to retain and nurture, etc. And then where are the teams that are struggling? For a multitude of different reasons, obviously, but where and what interventions and what support do they need to get to where they need to? So we're at BHRUT within the OD world. We're working a lot with continuous improvement because there's a lot about changing culture at team levels. There's team interventions, individual intervention. There's also system-wide intervention, which is what we're talking to with the wellbeing package that we've talked about here. So I think in terms of retention, yes, it's become more difficult to retain people because I think people during the pandemic become less tolerant of what they're being putting up with in their organisation or in their team. And I'm talking to the worst case scenarios here. There are some really good examples of amazing leadership, amazing team performance and amazing will. But I think during the pandemic, because it's asked so much of people, they are becoming less tolerant of the things. So we're hearing a lot of voice, and the way we try and understand what's going on is through our networks, our staff networks. We've got a numerous amount of them. We've got a wellbeing network. We've got loads and loads of opportunities to test and work with our staff on what is the reasons why things aren't as good as they could be, and what can we do about it, and work with us to bring upon those solutions. So Jackie was talking to our cost of living programme. That's done in conjunction with a number of staff at the HRUT. She connects, my member of my team, Stacey Lane, connects with NHS England and everyone really as much as possible to get some really good interventions in place. And having been in the OD office recently, we've been giving out the school vouchers to staff. And the impact that intervention has had has been amazing to see from our perspective as well, because we've had people in there sharing their stories. And it brings it really to life how we talk about nurturing talent, but there's so many things that are we need to attend to before we can get to the point where people can concentrate on their careers. So it really is, I think it's an ongoing cycle of diagnosis, design and delivery through the OD world. And making sure we're doing it with staff and testing our ideas with staff so they're relevant to them. And also, like Sarah was saying, attending to when people are thinking of leaving, why is that? So keeping that intelligence really, really present and visible in the organisation. I think that's what we need to work on more, is that's visible to leadership within their areas as to what's going on.
Let's move the discussion on to career progression, because I think over the decades, this phrase has come to mean something different. While maybe 40, 50, 60 years ago, a lot of people would get a job straight out of school and they would stay in the same job until they retire at 65. That's much less common now, I think. And we're all being led to aspire to greater things. How has career progression changed over the years? And how do you encourage people to maybe not stay in a comfort zone and think, well, we think you're capable of doing this, that, or the other. Have you ever thought about doing it? Because that has to be a proactive thing on the part of the employer. And I wonder whether every organisation is really conscious of that sometimes. It's much easier to just have the status quo in some ways. And how do you encourage people to think about their career progression?
We rely very heavily on the appraisal system, I would say, around having those conversations. I think we could learn from other industries in terms of different approaches, and identifying that talent and working with that talent. So I think it's really through the appraisal, but also keen to understand from other sectors how we could do that better. I think it's fair to say.
Sarah?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things. I think there's, how do you, somebody alluded to it earlier, how do you get people to understand the variety of careers available? So we have a project where we work with disengaged teenagers who have to sort of show them the variety of careers they can come into. And interestingly, when they, as part of that, it's often things like finance that they didn't know that they could do, have financial careers within the NHS. And then within, as Anne said, we use appraisals, we use career conversations. Really, I would go back to it, developing the managers to enable their staff to develop, to understand what the opportunities are for apprenticeships, maybe do some shadowing, secondments, trying out other things. And then at the other end, thinking about what we were saying about retention, I always talk about enabling people to leave well. So they might want to come back, because often they might need to go, if they're in a community trust, they might want to go to an acute trust, get some different experience, but we would always encourage them to keep in touch, and then they might want to come back. So one of the things we're looking at is how do we ensure that that process is easy. So if somebody's left us 6 months ago and then is applying for a job to come back, they don't have to go through a recruitment process as if we'd never heard of them before, because obviously we've got lots of experience. So, and as Anne said, I think we can learn from other sectors in that we don't want to make it difficult for people to come back, and we don't want to make it difficult for people to stay and progress in whatever route that they want to. So it's helping people be aware of what the options are, and then giving them development and support to take those options. And confidence, actually, because some people have sort of self-limited themselves and you know, that's not for me. I don't see other people like me doing that job. Therefore, I won't apply. And so we do a lot of support with our networks, for example, to help them to see that actually those jobs are for them as well as anybody else.
That's a really, really important thing, I think. I mean, Victoria, you must have experience of this, where you sort of talent spot somebody and you think, well, you could be doing a lot more than you are. And for whatever reason, they just don't have the confidence to say, well, yeah, I think I could do that. And in some ways, maybe opt for the easier life. How do you persuade people that they're not making the most of themselves?
That's an interesting one, isn't it? So I think we've deployed coaching quite effectively at times in those situations. So I can sit there and tell you could be more, but you need to believe it yourself and need to work through how you would do that. And I think confidence is a personal thing, and why, and the root cause and those limiting beliefs that are stopping that person moving forwards is something you unpick through a coaching kind of relationship. So I can note to a coachee that I've had recently prior to my maternity leave, who they always say they have a lack of confidence, and then the root cause of why, we work with the why and help them get to a place where they feel able and wanting to move to that next opportunity. So I do think it is within those relationships, and I think, Sarah, you're absolutely right about leadership within the situation. If every leader was an effective coach and actually knew their staff effectively and could have these conversations on a regular basis, I think we'd be moving a lot further forwards. So I think there's two parts really here. I think one of them is the opportunities available and making them very clear as to what those career pathways are. I think they're quite invisible in the organisations, I'd say. I know our nursing team are doing a lot with career maps as an example. So, being really clear that if I'm here and I want to get there, how do I get there? What's the competencies I need to develop? How do I get supported? Where's my mentorship? Where's my coaching? All of these sorts of elements, we need to make it clear across every career, and that's across organisations as well. So it's a big task. But if we take a step back, we need to make sure our organisation design is fitting to support those career pathways. I mean, we've done a lot of work looking at just how we're structured, and is it possible to move from that post to that post, and how would we move people, and how would we know, and all these sorts of things centrally, so that you're not dependent on management and leadership to some extent, because while we look to nurture and develop our leadership and management, of which there are hundreds of people, we need to make sure we're retaining the good people, and not losing them due to poor management and leadership. So so I think it's a number of different things, but certainly we need to also get better at job design. I think in order to get on in the NHS, you need to acquire people, and that's not everyone's skill set. It's a different skill set to maybe what you desire to do. So there is a lot about, and I know in the private sector they do this well, about if you want to get on linear, sort of growing your band, in the NHS you naturally will acquire people. But in the private sector, they have other opportunities, other career pathways where you can grow, not acquire people, but become a specialist expert in something at a more senior level. So do you see what it's these kind of different opportunities that prevent, I suppose, people from moving forwards because maybe that's not their skill set, or they do that and actually it makes more damage because it isn't their skill set. And I think the other side of it is we haven't mentioned much about diversity of talent and nurturing that.
We're coming on to that in a minute.
Oh, okay, brilliant. At BHRUT, we're incredibly diverse, and we have a lot of, I suppose, understanding of why people do not feel able, we talked about confidence, etc., to move forward, but they have the skill set, and we shouldn't treat them as if they don't have the skill set. It's a system to help them move. One of our programs we ran really successfully for a number of cohorts called Inspire was a talent management process specifically for BME staff, and then we would expand it out to other groups. But about 50% of those people that have gone through that cohorts have moved on to their desired career next step, be that a sideways move or a promotion. Unfortunately, I have to say a number of that was outside of our organisation. So that tells us a lot about how we're structured in our system, how we're developing people, which is great to go move on to another NHS organisation, but ideally we want to retain them for ourselves. So yeah, I'll pause that there, but yeah, absolutely, diversity of talent is incredibly important.
Jackie, in a sense, this has all got to come from the top, hasn't it? If you're talking about career development, career progression, there's almost got to be a sort of top-down approach to this, where all of the different managers in the different areas that you're responsible for, they've got to understand that it's a board priority for them to develop the careers of the people that they're responsible for. And I sometimes wonder whether boards, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector, really cotton on to the importance of this.
Well, you're absolutely right. The board has got to set the tone and the culture, and it's got to say, look, people are fundamentally important, which is why I touched on earlier the way in which we have, for example, now brought issues to do with people and well-being higher up the board agenda. Now, most people won't notice that, but it says something important about our priorities. It's also, to go back to the previous point, it also needs senior leaders to demonstrate and encourage and talk about their own career pathways so that other people can see it. So, earlier on, and I think, Anne, you said you started as a physiotherapist, yeah? And so
I
did
could do with
Shane.
you now, by the way.
So did Shane Degaris, who's just become the accountable officer across BARTS and BHRUT. In other words, he is now the executive leader of probably getting on for the largest trust in England. And just doing an interview. So the other day he did an interview that was on our public channels with, he answered a series of questions. So when people look at that and they think, oh, wait a minute, I might be starting here, but there is somewhere I can go. And what's more, the people who are leading the organisation have been where I am at some point. Yeah, I'm sure they've forgotten all about it now, but they have at one point been where I am. And, Victoria was also talking about these career ladders that we're developing at BHRUT. Sometimes people don't know that it's possible to go from being a healthcare assistant to being a nurse, to being a leader of nursing, to being the chief executive in the end, and making sure that people understand that route, and then they can see people who've gone through that route is really important. And also making sure, as you rightly say, that the board is thinking about that. I will just say, though, there are some people who, for all sorts of reasons, aren't necessarily going to want to progress. And that's why we also, as a board, need to say we value everybody in the organisation for your contribution to our overall objective of delivering really good patient care for our communities. It may be your reporter, it may be your clerk, it may be, sometimes the most important people to our patients is the first person they see when they walk through the door that helps them to know where they've got to go to and makes them feel more secure about being in a big, strange environment. So everybody has an really important role to play.
I think that's a really interesting point, because the very fact that the five of us are taking part in this webinar, it shows that we are people, I suppose, who haven't just decided that we're going to stay in the same job for 40 years. But there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that. And not everybody has that career aspiration. People have different priorities in their lives. Some people want to do a 9-to-5 job, and they come in at 9 o'clock and they leave at 5 o'clock, and don't necessarily want to stay on for the extra couple of hours to progress to a higher position. And those people are just as important to an organisation as those who are determined to climb up the career ladder. I mean, and is that something that you find in your organisation, that you have to be aware that not everybody wants to be the chief executive? Thank goodness, from your point of view.
Yeah, completely. Not everybody will, but it's creating the environment that everybody has the best, that they can be the best they can be, whatever that direction is. So that falls into the job design, it falls into the infrastructure, our IT systems, the environment in which they work. All of those things, play a part in enjoying your job and feeling that you are doing the job that you want to do within the life that you're leading. So it's been able to be flexible enough to meet the different aspirations, and whether that's to be the chief executive or whether that's to be the absolute best porter or the best housekeeper, they're all still really important values, and that's the challenge and also the opportunity in leadership to realise that.
Let's talk about diversity now, because seeing somebody who you think looks like you in the next rung up on the career ladder, or sort of at the top of the organisation, I think is incredibly important. And I wonder how the NHS does. I mean, the fact that you are all women here on this webinar, and a lot of these sessions that we've done, I mean, in terms of female-male proportions, they're actually rather good, possibly less so in racial diversity. But I wonder how much work different parts of the NHS put in to trying to make sure that there is a diverse range of people in senior leadership positions that can be the role models for people for the future. Jackie, obviously, I mean, if I look at all the different areas that we've got represented here, your organisation is probably is situated in an area which is incredibly diverse in racial terms. Do you have policies to try and encourage people from different backgrounds who speak different languages, for example, to join your trusts?
Well, we've worked enormously hard, and we've made actually inclusion one of our, at Barts Health, we've made it one of our 3 objectives because it is so important to us. So everything from some of the initiatives that I was describing with local schools and local colleges through to new leadership opportunity programs that we've developed, particularly for women and for Black and minority ethnic colleagues. And also just tackling head on sometimes people's feeling that it's not worth my while applying for that job because that's not something, because I'd be less likely to get it than somebody else. Sometimes we have to have really quite open and frank conversations and facilitate those, for example, with our staff networks, so that we can see where the actual hurdles are and where people fear the hurdles are as well. And then we need to be really strict about how we measure and monitor. So we, at a board...
What are those hurdles?
It might be things like racism and sexism in the recruitment processes. It might be people not feeling they've had the opportunities that then enable them to apply for things. It might be, as you said earlier, not seeing people. So, we can be who we can see. So they might not be the mentors and the role models. They might lack confidence about whether or not they should be applying for those roles. So that's why we need both cultural change, and we need, as an organisation, to say how important it is. And then we need some very sort of practical and targeted ways of delivering it. And we need to measure to make sure that what we're doing is actually working. And we are increasing the proportions of people with those protected characteristics who are in our leadership roles.
Sarah, what about, we always tend to think of diversity as being sort of racial background or whether you're male or female, but of course there are many different minorities. And one of the things I come across a lot in my work in radio is disabled people feel incredibly discriminated against in terms of career development. Is that an area that you do any work in?
Yes, I mean, we like others have said, we've got staff networks across a different range of protected characteristics, and actually our disability and wellbeing network have done some really innovative work. We've got disability confident leader status, which means that there are certain things that we've committed to our disabled community that we will definitely do as part of our recruitment process. But we've also introduced things like deaf awareness training. We've done some work around other what you call hidden disabilities to really help staff see that actually there are a lot of people who A, have a disability, and B, may not necessarily want to share that disability with their organisation, but we've kind of encouraged people to be more open. So I think, and we've got diverse interview panels, disability is actually one of our areas where people have really worked hard. We're doing a lot of work on reasonable adjustments to make that process easier. So where people need reasonable adjustments in order to be able to do the job that we need them to do, it was quite an onerous process to A, know that you could ask for adjustments, and B, really understand that the adjustments that you might need if you experience a particular disability might be different from the adjustments that somebody else might need who experiences the same disability. So again, it's about looking at the process and how do we make it easy for people rather than hard. And we've introduced wellbeing passports for everybody so that they're not so they can take it from job to job. So a passport isn't just because I've got a disability, I've got this thing that says I have to have this particular support. It's actually, we all might need particular support because of circumstances. So we're kind of trying to remove the stigma of you've got this passport because you've got a disability. Actually, again, back to managers having wellbeing conversations about what do you need in order to be able to give your best at work and be your best at work.
And as managing director of your organisation, what have you done to try and improve diversity and make sure that people from different backgrounds feel valued in your organisation?
Yeah, we've done a lot of board development on an inclusive board leadership programme. We did that with one of 3 organisations in the country to progress on that. And really, pulling all of this together as part of an EDI improvement journey. How do we use our data points to inform and improve on the key challenges? How do we align our strategy and our ambition with clarity around an implementation plan? Really focusing on the development and maturing our staff network. So those regular meetings with staff network chairs, with the executive team. How do we incorporate our quality, diversity and inclusion lens into staff induction, continuing that support of executive development? And how do we're also thinking about our wider work on population health within our communities and understanding our services delivered on need. So improving the understanding through our delivery models and our models of care and access. And so it's what we're looking at doing is how this becomes core within our organisation, across all of our organisation, and everybody's business. So we've got a very strong EDI improvement journey and really underpinned by using data to inform and improve that.
Now, we're in danger of going over our time now, but Victoria, you started the discussion in this area. Is there anything that you want to wrap up with here?
I think just to add, I think this is the biggest probably challenge we've got in terms of culture, I'd say. I think it's taking every opportunity where you can to try and shift that system to move it on. So as an example, if you've got a recruitment process going on at a senior level, it's how you do that in a diverse way that promotes and offers that opportunity across the areas that you need to get into that level. So it is a very positive action process. And also it's nurturing those tiers, currently tiers below, and I don't like using hierarchical speak, but it's nurturing those levels to be ready for those opportunities. So there's 2 things there. It's getting the system ready and getting the people ready. And that's going to take some time, but I think it needs to be as I think everyone said, in a measured and planned way and a very purposeful way. I don't think this is going to happen just by the nature of wanting it to happen. It has to be a very purposeful thing to get leadership diversity in particular.
Well, we like that word purposeful at the Purpose Coalition. So well done for finishing up with that.
I didn't notice that, but
you'll go far. Jackie, as somebody, Victoria mentioned hierarchies there. You chair one of the biggest trusts in the country. Do you want to just wrap up and maybe make a few remarks in conclusion about what we can take away from the various points that have been raised in this webinar?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for focusing on this really important issue, because as all of us have said, unless we get this right, we are simply not going to have the right people in the right place to do what we need to do for our patients. So it is absolutely crucial. And it's enormously pressured at the moment, given the national position we find ourselves in, given the cost of living crisis for our staff. But whilst it's a problem, I think we've also today demonstrated that there are a whole range of things that we can do, that we are really improving the way in which we are thinking about our recruitment and getting us wider, reaching out, not taking it for granted that people will understand what roles are in the NHS, but that we will reach out, we'll work with schools, we'll tell people that whole range of opportunities so that we can encourage them into our organisations. Then we understand how important it is to provide progression for people, that all managers are working with the people that they're managing in order to help them to understand the career opportunities that are available, to make those, if they possibly can, to make time available for it, and to ensure that people get the support to do that. And that we're doing that in a way that tackles people's fear of discrimination or of not being able to get on in the organisation. Then we're recognising that there are a whole range of different things that people are going to be worried about and that we can do to support them, and that we do that working with our staff. I think Anne made the really important point earlier on. There's no point saying to our staff, well, we think what you really want is X or Y. When we did engagement with people at Barts Health about how we were going to develop our wellbeing offer post the pandemic, we talked to over 3,000 colleagues. One of the things that really stuck that somebody said was, we don't want pizza and massage chairs. We want to come to work and have the things we need to do the job, and we want to feel safe. So when you work and think about what different teams need and give them the support to develop those, you'll be more likely to keep people in your organisation. And we need to continue, as you've rightly challenged me on, Ian, at the most senior levels to say, this is important, and we're going to manifest that in the way that we talk about it, the culture we set in our organisation, the priorities that we have, and the support that we provide for our staff. And this webinar has just been one example of the way in which we can share the best ways of doing that.
Well, Jackie, I look forward to nurturing your talent on the next edition of the For the Many podcast. Listen, it's been a great hour. I think we've all learned a lot. I hope everybody who's been watching has learned something from this as well. If you want to know more about the Purpose Coalition, just go to the website and you can see lots of other different webinars that we've done over the past few months. I'm sure there'll be more to come. Jackie, Sarah, Victoria, and Anne, thank you very much for taking part. Join us again next time. Goodbye.